All right, welcome and thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Merv Lapus. I'm the Vice President of Education Outreach and National Partnerships for Common Sense, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping kids thrive in our digital world. For over 16 years, Common Sense has been helping families navigate the increasingly complex digital world. We're here today for an especially important and timely segment in the Conversation with Common Sense series, where we offer real-time advice for navigating the dilemmas for parents as they may be facing things such as distance learning challenges or even managing screen time. But this week's topic is certainly more challenging. Like many of you, I have found the past few days to be some of the most difficult to comprehend, personally as a father, an immigrant, and a person of color, professionally as an educator and a community advocate. These are challenging conversations and simply overwhelming when I think about how to discuss these issues with my own children. So as I watch the barrage of news, the police brutality, and the violence compounded by the toll of our current pandemic, I am compelled to unpack what is going on with my children. The challenge, of course, is how do I even have such a conversation? So today's discussion is really aimed at helping kids process violence, trauma, and race in a world of nonstop news and how to speak openly, effectively, and age appropriately with them. So let me introduce you to our guests here today. Today we have Dr. Jacqueline Douge, who is a pediatrician, public health advocate, writer, and creator of What is Black, a blog and podcast that helps parents raising Black children and teens navigate race, racism, and parenting. She is the co-author of the AAP policy statement, The Impact of Racism on Child and Adolescent Health, and a mom of 2 sons. Welcome, Dr. Jacqueline Douge. We also have with us Dr. Nathan Chomilo, who is a pediatrician and the Minnesota Medicaid Medical Director. His advocacy work with Reach Out and Read Minnesota and Minnesota Doctors for Health Equity has been recognized by the City of Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights, which recognized him as a 2019 History Maker at Home recipient. He lives in Minneapolis with his wife and son. Welcome, Dr. Chomilo. And Dr. Allison Briscoe-Smith, she's our clinical aid psychologist and the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Wright Institute. She specializes in supporting families through trauma, racialized trauma in particular, and in talking about race. She is a mother of an 11, 9, and 2-year-old. And finally, our moderator today, my friend and colleague, Jasmine Hood Miller. She is the communications and events manager at Common Sense, as well as a guest blogger. Jasmine serves as the diversity chair at her children's preschool and is a mother of 2 kids of her own, ages 3 and 5. So just a quick note about today's program format. Our panelists are going to talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll take live questions from the audience. And those questions will be entered via the chat feature of whichever platform you're joining us with today. Also keep an eye out for relevant links to the resources and other information that we will be posting in the chat throughout the conversation. Thank you again for being here today. And with that, Jasmine, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Merv. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to get right into it. First, I'd like to start by letting you guys say a word about how you're feeling right now. And we can start with Dr. Briscoe-Smith.
Hi, thanks for providing this opportunity. I'm really excited to be in community with you all. Short answer would be I'm exhausted and full of rage and moving that rage into action and overwork. I'm not sure if anyone can resonate with that, but that's where I am right now, but happy to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Dr. Douge.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm happy to be with my colleagues and look forward to the conversation and hopefully that we can share some insights for families to help them.
And Dr. Chomilo.
It's been a rough week. So I'm in Minneapolis, and beyond just the conversations we're about to have today, the kind of real life threat of having to potentially leave our home and pack everything up and run out has weighed heavily, and certainly gives me even greater respect for the families that have actually fled violence, and so it's been a very kind of compounded stress when you look at this and what COVID is doing to our communities. It's been rough.
So we all know that the talk has the talk, right, has almost universally been referred to as a conversation about sex, maybe reserved for teenagers. But we hear more people now referring to the talk as a conversation between parents and kids about race. For Black and Brown families, those conversations have been taking place for many years. I had my first conversation with my son when he was 4. And the question that's on so many parents' minds right now is how to approach the conversation, that conversation. Dr. Chomilo, I'll start with you. When does that conversation about race and racism start? And how do you advise families to have conversations that are developmentally appropriate at the right age?
Yeah, so it's something that we unfortunately don't get a lot of training in medical school, and so it's been something that I've learned to weave through our practice. What we do get training on is what we call anticipatory guidance. This is the age when you should start introducing food. This is the age you should start thinking about potty training and some tips on that. And so the places I've built it in is kind of similar with where it's developmentally appropriate. We know that children do realize differences based on race really early as 6 to 9 months in some studies, but the ability to really kind of talk to them about it usually starts to present around 3 years of age, where I kind of frame it as you might notice that your child is starting to recognize differences between boys and girls. Well, they're also noticing differences how people get treated based on the color of their skin. And so talking about how you yourself, maybe explicitly or implicitly, sending messages about race is important, and kind of connecting families to resources at that time, and keeping things very concrete, because at that age, that's how their minds work, and they're thinking, if one person has this type of characteristic or description, all people like that, and so you have to be careful about getting in this good bad dichotomy. Certainly, there's a lot of good books that you can use to kind of have those conversations and talk about how people are different and how people are the same. And then as you move into school age, I usually start to talk about how there is unfairness in our world and how we need to recognize that and talk about that with our children. In particular, when we look at school discipline, I often talk to parents of my Black and Brown children in my clinic about how when they interact with school and their school discipline action, there's a lot of times that they might see actions in school that are normal for kids of those ages, but get labeled disruptive, and how that's not fair. And then how do you move past that? How do you talk about how the world isn't fair, and what are ways that you can kind of build from that first acknowledgement of it? And you can certainly look at things like talking about history at that age and why things are unfair in the way they are. Again, you want to continue to push back against stereotypes, and I really do find books to be really useful at that age. And then as you move into your teenagers, you're really starting to have some of these more complex conversations. You can really start to address things straight on, as such as structural racism, white supremacy, having those conversations and using this is where sometimes movies or TV series that really cover these topics can be good ways to have these conversations. And then I guess just in the overall frame of what we're talking about right now, when there's an event like it happens right now, it's really important to first start with where are they at? What have they heard? And then from there you will build. You want to come back to them after you've already initiated that conversation. It's not going to be a one-time conversation. It's going to be a thing where you come back and say, last time we talked about what happened to Mr. Floyd, and I was thinking about this, and what have you heard since? What are you thinking about since? And so making an ongoing thing and not just a one-off conversation. This is something that needs to continue, because children will continue to have questions, and they don't always know how to ask them or feel comfortable maybe asking them because of how we feel about race and how that gets communicated unconsciously to children. And so us being the ones to come back to them is really important.
Yeah, I think that like any lesson as a parent that you're trying to teach, it's never just one conversation. It's conversation over time. Dr. Briscoe-Smith, are there any advantages or disadvantages to initiating those hard conversations with your kids? Should parents be proactive, or is it okay to be reactive to events like this?
I think a little bit of both. I really like to support families and listen to families in thinking about what they would really like to do. I think, as Dr. Chomilo was kind of talking about, and as you spoke about as well, these are small foundational conversations that can be had over a long time. And so it's a way to kind of do something like, well, what do you want to communicate anyway? What is your family mission statement? What is it that you are telling your children all the time, and that you can build in these conversations that allows you to be proactive? So yes, we're going to talk about fairness, and we're going to talk about fairness every day. And we're going to point out, what happened? Was that fair? No, it wasn't. What can we do? So that's a way of being kind of proactive, and then it also gives you the language to be reactive to these big pieces like this. So I would say it's a combination. I think many families are concerned about that their proactive conversation might actually incite or overwhelm children. I think actually that's a split that falls between white families and families of color. It's a necessity for many families of color to speak about these issues proactively as a means of protecting and engaging their children. So the invitation is really for white families to join in and to be proactive and to do a lot of the thinking about what is it that you want to communicate. Is it about fairness? Is it about kindness, compassion, working hard? Do the work to figure out what it is that you would like to communicate and how you've been communicating about that all along. And that will help us to kind of address the kind of proactive or reactive part. And also, as you're saying, frame this as something beyond a one-time conversation. It's happening all the time, and you're also not just talking about it, you're modeling it.
Right. Dr. Douge, you co-wrote the American Academy of Pediatrics statement on the impact of racism on child and adolescent health. And many medical professionals have declared racism as a public health crisis. Can you speak to why this is the case and how it manifests in the care and well-being of children?
Certainly, thank you for the opportunity to talk about, I think, such an important statement. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has, for a long time advocated for the health and well-being of children, and over a period of time has focused on social determinants of health, where kids live, grow, play, those things that are contextual for kids that allow them to thrive. Many of those topics range from poverty to immigration to homelessness, right? Food insecurity, and racism is on that continuum of determinants of health, right? So if you're exposed to prolonged stressors such as racism, it can have a long-term health effect, and it's manifested, in health outcomes such as low birth weight, our infant mortality disparities, to even affecting mental health and well-being. And so, the importance of tackling racism is the issue of how can we create a more conducive environment for kids so that all kids can thrive and grow, and sort of mitigate some of the toxic stress effects of that racism provides and creates those poor health outcomes for children.
And either Dr. Douge or Dr. Chomilo, you both are advocates of health equity. What does health equity mean, and what does that look like, and how can people support those efforts?
Yeah, so when I think about health equity, it's really the opportunity for an individual to reach their full health and potential. And we know in our society, the way it's structured and it's been built, that not everyone has had the same opportunity to reach their full health and potential. And so when we're talking not just about access to a doctor or a clinic or a hospital, but we're talking about access to stable housing. We're talking about access to well-funded schools, nutrition. We're talking about a criminal justice system like we're seeing in the last week that treats everyone equitably. And so when you don't have that, what you have is people who will start from different settings, and the same effort, depending on your race and your zip code, might produce or will produce very different results. And so it's really kind of the recognition that as physicians, if we're really invested in the health of our children and the health of our communities, we need to be looking not only within what we're talking about in the walls of the clinic, but what are the other drivers, as Dr. Douge mentioned, of health? What are the other drivers beyond just seeing a doctor that contribute to your health, that allow you to reach your potential and really lead to a more equitable and just society?
And I don't know if you wanted to add to that, Dr. Douge, or if...
Oh, sure. I mean, I think I definitely would echo what Dr. Chomilo said. But in addition, right, I think when we talk about equity, it's not just saying that, someone needs access to education, right? We have to look at contextually what type of education, right? So, I mean, if I have access to a school, but I don't have access to, especially COVID-19, I don't have Wi-Fi at home so that I can access the classroom and interact with the teacher. If my parent has to work a job and they don't have access to childcare, then that's a problem. So when we talking about access to food and clothing and housing, education, right? We're not just looking for let me just have that teacher, let me just have that classroom, right? We need to have all kids have access to Wi-Fi. We need to have all kids have access, parents have access to quality, affordable childcare so that parents can work and make a living wage, right? So all of those are important we need to have a justice system that does not treat a person of color different than someone who is not of color, a system that doesn't discriminate based on your socioeconomic status, right? So it's beyond just access. It's about creating, meeting people where they are and providing those opportunities so that everyone has an equal opportunity, and not so that they can live and have and meet their potential.
Now, I
would, I guess, just add as well, because one of the questions was, what can you do to support it? And, for kind of the context of what can parents do when they're talking particularly about race and racism is, really highlighting how inequitable the society is, and how, I think, I'm blanking on her name, Dr. Beverly Tatum, in her kind of talks and writing, talks about when you're going through a neighborhood and you're talking about the size of different people's houses, and if you tell your parents because it's a value, or your children because it's a value within your family, that hard work is important, and we have a nice house because daddy or mommy worked hard, kind of acknowledging that doesn't mean that people with smaller houses in neighborhoods that might not look the same as yours aren't working hard. It just means that they don't have the same opportunity, and that's not fair. And that's something that we can do, and we should be doing to help improve. Absolutely,
yes. I want to take a moment right now to say the names of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. And all types of families are experiencing a spectrum of emotions right now at varying levels. Dr. Briscoe-Smith, as parents, how do we share and process our grief, anger, fear, and all of these, mixture of emotions without overwhelming our kids? And how do we help them process their feelings and emotions?
I mean, I'm a big fan of put your oxygen mask on first. I think it's really important that we actually make time to check in with ourselves. We are the foundation, and we need to be available for our parenting. That being said, I feel like a lot of parents work really hard to not show our children how we're distressed, but our kids know. Our kids can pick it up, our kids can feel it, our kids can narrate it. So I think it's really better to be honest. And the only way you can be honest is if you check in with, how am I feeling? How am I doing? So even if it's a 10-minute check-in that you can provide each kind of day, is to really think about, how am I really feeling and doing? And then it's also really important, especially for little ones, but for others, for us to narrate what's going on for ourselves. We can teach our kids how to manage affect and emotion by explicitly teaching them. Mama's having a really hard day right now because she's really sad about what's been going on, but I'm going to be okay. I think that modeling is actually takes us to the second part, which is that's a live example about how to manage emotion. I think it's really important that we give our children permission to have their feelings, that we have permission to have our feelings. We help them to put names and words to it. We help them to understand where it rests within their body. So I can tell that I'm really anxious because I have a hard time sleeping. I can tell I'm feeling angry because my fists are balled up. Those are the things that we can kind of offer to our children, which is about helping them move through their feelings, not shut it down. Have them move through how they can be feeling. We also have to really be willing to listen to how our children and what they're communicating. I think that we have been paying attention to this in the context of COVID, noticing that our children are manifesting their distress in different ways. This is an added multiplier. As my father, who's a physician, used to say, this is 1 + 1 = 81. This is adding more, a synergistic effect in terms of the stressors. So we've got to listen really deeply to ourselves and see how we are doing, but also really deeply to our children and how they might be faring as well.
And Dr. Chomilo, people want to know what to do with those feelings, right? They want to know how they can put them into action. What does it mean to be anti-racist, and what's the difference between that and being colorblind, and you know, how people can take their feelings and do something with them that's positive?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So it's a real important point, because I think even how I was raised at times was very much it's okay to just not be racist, which means you're not the one and not the family that's telling bad racist jokes, right? But the difference is anti-racism is actually kind of standing up and pushing back against the racist systems that we see, right? And so it's teaching our kids that it's only not okay to tell those jokes, that if you see those jokes being told, you need to say something and do something and stand up for those who are being marginalized. And so it's important that, just like Dr. Briscoe-Smith is talking about, if we're thinking about, and as we should be entering this work of teaching our children to be anti-racist, we need to look at our own history, because just growing up in America, we're all kind of socialized to breathe in that smog of structural racism, and that impacts us whether we know it or not. And so really doing some work on us first while we're trying to help our children become anti-racist and lead our world to a more just and equitable place is really important.
I want to make a final point before we start taking some questions from our audience that's watching. With near constant exposure to news and social media, more kids are witnessing violence and its aftermath firsthand. They're seeing it on their phones, on their devices. Older kids constantly see it in their news feeds, and the endless scrolling can bring them despair. And then for younger kids, they may catch a glimpse of something that's on the news or overhear adults talking. This has even happened in my own house, where I was, online looking at something, and unfortunately there was a picture of George Floyd on my screen, and my son walked up before I could, switch screens. And he knew that there was something wrong in that image. He didn't understand it, obviously, because he's so young, but for people of color and Black people, frequent images of frequent exposure to graphic images of violence against Black people, combined with a lived experience of racism, can have long-term mental health effects. And Dr. Briscoe-Smith, how can we protect our kids from this trauma and navigate all the information that they're constantly bombarded with?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we can try to be proactive with our elder kids, with our teens, and to sit down and have the conversation with them about, what are you seeing? How are you seeing it? Let's talk about what it means for you to be exposed to viral images of Black Death. I had a student, Devonna Jacobs, who did some work that found, not surprisingly, that it's deleterious to our health to watch images of viral Black Death again and again and again. And she was looking at this in the context of young Black women. So that's a well duh kind of thing. We know that. Yet it's really compelling, and our youth are really at risk because they're on their screens, even more so in the context of Corona. So I think we've got to have the conversation with them. And we've got to have the conversation to say, how do we slow this down? What are you watching? You know, invite a teenager to think about, how do you feel before this? How do you feel after this? What are the ways that we can kind of restrict or moderate that exposure in a particular way? So with the older kids, I think we have to do it in that way. With our younger kids, I think we're going to try our best to limit that exposure. And I also want to frame that is our privilege. If you're not having the exposure because it's on your streets, and if you're not having the exposure because it's in the choppers overhead, and it's only in terms of media, that we have to harness that our privilege is showing up in that moment. And that we can kind of use that moment to think about, okay, they saw this on the screen. I want to pause. What did you see? How did you understand? How are you feeling? Let me explain. And also let me tell you that right now in this little moment right here that you're safe and you're okay. We can try to kind of moderate that, but I also think we need to train all of our kids to be savvy consumers, to understand what is clickbait. Why are people showing this? Who gets paid when people see this? Who is benefiting from our anger and our rage? And who's benefiting from us getting worn down? Those are conversations that we can start when kids are little, but definitely should be moving and advancing as we're talking about youth here. So that they can have some agency in what they're seeing as much as possible, and they can also work towards mediating those impacts by being in relationship with us.
That's really helpful. And you know, at Common Sense, we advocate for good media use in technology. We have lots of great recommendations for movies and books around this topic and many other topics. Dr. Douge, I know you have a podcast and a book club. How do you think media can help parents with tackling these issues?
Oh, thank you for asking that question, because I think, you know, we hear a lot of information about how bad, you know, we can demonize media, but it's a tool, especially for young adults and for teenagers and tweens, right? Really, that's their world, right? That's how they communicate, especially now given COVID-19, and they're not able to really interact with their friends. So it really can be a tool. And I see media, whether it's visual, audio, or on paper, right? So, or, you know, written media, those are all opportunities to really explore new topics, learn new things, and also really be conversation starters. I know for me, I've used books to learn how can I be a better parent, right? How can I better have conversations and engage with my teenagers? As a pediatrician practicing, right? Reading other people's viewpoints, reading about psychologists' work, reading about sociologists' work, it really provides opportunities to see other viewpoints, right? And then I may or may not agree with them, but there are opportunities to kind of figure out and also kind of help your kids determine and think critically, right? And also when you're having really difficult time with topics, like I always use the example of the sex talk. I know you kind of started us out about what we typically think the talk is, right? It's about sex. Well, when we have, you know, many parents that, you know, they don't feel comfortable talking about sex, right? So they'll provide a book to their daughter about puberty, right? About development with their young sons as well. So I'm saying the same thing with using media even very early. Dr. Chomilo talked about his work, you know, briefly about reach out and read, right? I think books are a great opportunity for a learning lesson, not only for parents of color, but for white parents as well. So if you only have books and stories that feature a certain type of child, then you have to think about what are you normalizing for your child's experience, right? So kids can't be stars in their own stories because they only see this one type of kid, and they don't see themselves. And on the other hand too, there are opportunities where kids that don't typically see themselves in those books, once they get those books, that's affirming, right? They see they see that, okay, there are other kids like me. They like to ride bikes. They like to go skateboarding. They like to, go on adventures, right? Those provide great opportunities, and also opportunities to engage in conversations very, very young. And you can celebrate differences. You can celebrate how normal, oh, that kid looks just like you and does the same things you do, right? So then there's you creating connection. Dr. Briscoe-Smith talked earlier about kindness, right? Books are a great way to, how do you show kids how to be kind, right? You model that as a parent, but you can also use media to show how that occurs. I think back to when I was younger, and I think about Sesame Street. That's why I love media, because of my exposure to Sesame Street. I saw Gordon, right? I saw a Black man, a family on that show. I saw a Latinx Hispanic woman on that show. I saw a diversity of characters. I could see someone that looked like me, right? I could see that, oh, I could aspire to be anything and be anybody that I want to be. It was affirming for me. And I think that's the power of media. And it's also, as a pediatrician, I'll go back to being a pediatrician. Many times we only have 15 minutes, right? If that, to talk about really hard topics. So I'm going to tell you in 15 minutes, brush your teeth. Let's talk about racism. Ride a bicycle. Okay. It's a conversation you have to have over time, right? And media is a way to sort of provide that additional resource. I mean, as a pediatrician, I've given out lots of pamphlets, and I know as a parent, I haven't always read those pamphlets that I've received from my pediatrician, and then I've given out. So, there are different ways that people learn: visual, audio. So I think there are just opportunities. You can tell I'm excited about media, right? There are just other opportunities to engage and have the conversation. And again, just going back personally, I think for me, media has been the way for me to connect with my sons, especially as they became teenagers. So, my youngest son, and I think he's okay with me sharing this, right? So he has conversations with me very late in the day. So something comes on TV or he's watching YouTube, I'll come home, ask him how his day is, and he's been home now. I'll ask him, so how are you doing? And he's like, oh, okay, nothing. But then maybe 9 or 10 o'clock, he's watched something on television or YouTube or whatever, media he's doing. And then he says, oh, Mom, did you know about so-and-so? Then that's also another time for me where media has been very important for us to engage and have conversations about topics that we probably would not have had I not been engaged with what they're doing, even listening to the music that they're listening to. I may not always like it, but it's an opportunity to learn something and spark conversations.
Yeah, it's that foot in the door. Okay, we're gonna get to some questions now.
I'll just quick add to that. The kind of way to think about it that has been described. I'm sorry, I forget the librarian's name, but she came up with this concept of books and media in general being as both a mirror and a window.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so what Dr. Douge was talking about is you want to be able to see yourself, but you also want to be able to see into other families' lives and how they might live their lives, particularly because in our society, we're so hyper-segregated. And so the chance that you're going to see most children in the United States see people in their own communities that look different than them is pretty low. And so it's one of the first ways you can start to get that exposure to your children is through books and through the type of media you expose them to.
Okay. So we have this first question here from a parent who says that their son, who's a Black male, 11, almost 12 years old, is showing no emotion and no distress, and that they're trying to draw this out from him and do modeling. And there is a history of early childhood traumas. So what are maybe some tips that would be helpful for this parent in talking to their son? Mm-hmm. I don't know who wants to take that.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Thanks for
Dr. Briscoe-Smith.
Oh, yeah, I'll jump in. So I think just real quick, I think it's important to kind of listen to how your son is doing. And I think sometimes we're confused when kids don't have bigger emotion. But again, the idea is listen. So if they're telling you they're okay, then they may be okay. This is, there's a chance to kind of build this up and kind of think about this over time. And we really have to give permission for all of us to be feeling how we're feeling. Some people are feeling like they can't work. Some people are feeling they want to do a whole lot of work. So it's okay. Model, have the conversation, and that modeling should also include things like, this is how I'm feeling, and it's okay for us to feel differently. But I didn't want to, I know that there are other opinions and opportunities. So Dr. Douge, sorry if I stepped over you there.
Yes, Dr. Douge, did you want to add to that?
Unfortunately, I'm not able to hear Dr. Briscoe-Smith.
Oh.
Yeah.
But I'm sure what that was wonderful.
Okay, we'll move to our next question.
I guess the one thing I would I would just add, and I don't know the context of the family, but I think it's really important that if there is it's a mixed race family, right? So parents are different race than the children. That it's important that if you are feeling certain things and you think your children are feeling others, just based off of stereotypes or not, that you reflect on that, and that we try not to project things that we're feeling and worried about onto our children, and just kind of repeating that idea of doing that work on yourself first and making sure you get that oxygen mask on first. I think that's really important, and there's a lot of great resources that I'm sure we'll share at the end that really I think help when there is that mixed race family for parents and children to kind of connect and understand how their experiences are going to be different.
Yeah, I think that's a important distinction and note to make for that I think families will find helpful. How do we help? This is another question from a parent. How do we help middle school age students virtually during this time? I'm sure that there are a lot of people feeling like not only do they want to do something, and typically you have that reaction and you try to find resources or things to engage and become active with, but because we're all quarantined right now, it may be a little bit harder to figure out how to be active. They said that they're holding community circles later this week, and if there are any tips or suggestions that that any of you might have. Dr. Douge, can you maybe touch on that?
Sure. I think it also depends on the age of the child, because I find that many kids, if there's a way that you can get them to connect with each other using the technology that they have. So many kids are already reaching out to other friends, if they have Instagram or if they have Facebook. Well, maybe they don't have Facebook. I'm aging myself. But, they're using Snapchat. They're using whatever medium that they're using. I think other ways to potentially help kids virtually. Again, just connecting them with friends and family. I know myself, we're doing, we do video chatting, video conferencing with other family members so that we stay engaged as a family. So if there's an opportunity to do that, I think that might be a great suggestion. And the other way too, virtually, is, just showing support. You can send virtual hugs and just staying connected, I think might be some ways to help.
Great. Let's see if we have another question. Okay. Someone said that there's an interesting comment about geographic self-segregation of groups, which we know is prevalent throughout this country. How do we promote opportunities for multiple groups of kids to connect with each other and create shared experiences online? Maybe being able to connect with people who are not necessarily in their communities or neighborhoods, but finding that community virtually across anywhere. Dr. Chomilo?
Yeah, that's a great question that I honestly don't have a great answer for online, because just like everyone else, I'm kind of making our way through this new reality of COVID-19. traditionally we talk about thinking about, what types of clubs and activities your children are in. Are they in, a sports team that's in your neighborhood or maybe in a different neighborhood? Are there certain like outdoor activities or other, groups, extracurricular activities that you can diversify where what spaces you have those and what communities you participate in those types of activities as a way, certainly thinking about where you play and learn can be a way to get more interaction with other kids of different backgrounds. But virtually, I haven't heard of anything. I guess my assumption is if you are getting connected by those same groups, say, you have an art club or a music club, you're part of an orchestra or something that is doing some virtual connection, that they might also, others in other parts of the country might be offering those services too. There might be an opportunity to expand your interactions that way. But again, that's a great question. I'd be curious if anyone else has ideas.
Yeah, I think that, there are, because of the nature of being online, it creates opportunities for kids to maybe find connection and community with other students or, peers that they have something in common with that they may not find right in their own school or their own community. And I'm sure like as we, the longer we're at home, some of these may pop up more and be accessible to kids, chess club or, virtual different, kind of activities that you would normally do in like maybe an after school program, but maybe now you can connect with kids in different places. It's something that I'll try to see if I can tap some of my Common Sense colleagues to find some resources and share that with the audience after. Let's see, another question. How do you talk to teens about riots as a response to this tragedy? I think is the question. Dr. Briscoe-Smith, do you want to?
Yeah. So, I think the first part is, I'm going to sound like a broken record. How do you think about this? So we can kind of think about a language, riots, uprising, protests. There's part of it is how do we think about this? So you've got to do the work as a parent for you to understand how are you understanding this first, and what is it that you want to communicate about it? And then, the next part is ask the question. How do you understand what's going on? Here's what we're seeing. How do you understand that behavior? How do you want to think about that? And I encourage us to kind of think in complex ways about it. Well, what's the history of this? How do we understand this? Why do we use this term for this group of people and not for others? So we've got the opportunity, especially, with teens, I think, to kind of complicate this. But the simple question is, how do you understand what's going on? And what do you think those people are feeling? Also, I think with teens, we want to ask them, what would you do in this position as well? So, but again, part of this, I think, is a beautiful opportunity for us to do some of the hard work of thinking about, how do I understand this? Where are the places that I need to seek information and to challenge some of my previous thoughts as I engage in a conversation with my children about it?
Great. Okay. So I think, maybe we have time for one more question. Okay. And this is probably a good one to end on. How do we support students who are mixed race feeling like they have to pick a side? And particularly, I think in times where there are very contentious conversations and debates amongst family and friends and at this time. So how can we support students who are of multiple race? Dr. I don't know who wants to take, Dr. Chomilo, Dr. Douge. I think you talked about this
sure.
a little
so I'm
too.
Yeah. And I'm a biracial Black man, and so this is certainly it's going to be an ongoing thing for any child and really any adult. And I think the first thing is understanding that there is this, what's been described as dual consciousness. It's how you see yourself and how you know others view you, and that will depend on if those others are white or Black, or if you happen to be, Hispanic or Black or Asian or Black, no matter your mixed race. And so I think acknowledging that and that there's this extra pressure to show up certain ways in certain spaces. I think it's talking with the child about how they see themselves, how they feel in those spaces, and kind of exploring that with them is really important. Helping them understand that and get to have the confidence to be who they are no matter what space they're in, and that can certainly take time. But I think the acknowledgement that it's happening is really important, because I just know from my own personal experience that you can almost feel crazy, like you're the only one who is having to deal with the stress and this thought of constantly wondering what other people are thinking of you, and if you're Black enough, or if you're white enough, or whatnot. And so I think really being there and open and understanding that it's a struggle that is, again, not going to be solved with one conversation, but they would really appreciate someone to talk to and think through those.
Great. So I want to give each of you an opportunity just for a closing remark or tips that we can leave parents with as they take this conversation and continue it at home with their families. Dr. Douge.
So my tip would be, have the conversations. I think when we shy away from tough topics, it says more. Our inactions say just as much as what we do, right? So if we want to model for our kids, I think it's good to to be kind, but you also have to talk about kindness. You have to talk about one of the times that you need to be kind. So I think, first and foremost, I think it's important to have a conversation, and it may be scary. This topic is a difficult topic, especially for communities that may not have had to have those conversations. Even as a Black mother, and just like Dr. Chomilo, I'm biracial, I have multiracial children, but we identify as Black. So no matter how I show up or people assume I come into this world as a Black woman, a mom of 2 Black sons. And so I have to have that conversation, but I want other people to understand that it's important to have the conversation, not only to be an ally and to be anti-racist. It's not racist to have the conversation about race, but what it does is it validates that people are different. We can celebrate differences, we can acknowledge differences, and know that other people are valuable. Okay, because when we don't see them, what do we say about them? Are we saying that they're not the same? They're not of value. They're not of worth. Everyone is. We're all human. And I just say, be brave. Have the conversation. It's going to be awkward if you've never had it before, but just like you have conversations about teaching your kids about the importance of driving safety, right? You prepare your kids before they go out into the world to drive a car. You want to talk to your kids about preparing them for their sexual identity, sexual health, right? Their overall health and well-being. This is also an important conversation parents have to have with their kids to help them with development, and also help them feel good about themselves, and also be affirmed, and also know that you're open to having those conversations, and they'll talk with you as well. So you're just setting up the model to have those conversations.
Thank you. Dr. Chomilo?
Yeah, I think 2 things. One, I see a lot of similarities when we think about the trauma around these events of the last week to the trauma that we experience as parents and helping our children navigate mass shootings and school shootings, right? And one of the things I often talk about is you need to be the filter through which your children are processing this information and processing their feelings. And so that means constantly checking in, like we've talked about before, but just thinking about how you're going to be the filter through which how your children process these difficult times. And then the second one is another kind of reiteration. We don't sit around and try to teach our children math if we haven't the foggiest of how to do it. We look into their books, we try to read ahead, we do the work so that we can help our children grow and learn. And the same thing has to happen when we're talking about race. You have to do the work on yourself. And so in the immediate time, you can kind of help with the trauma and moving through to the next steps, but long term, really continuing to do that work. And so, unfortunately, this is probably going to happen again. And so, being prepared next time means, continue the work after, just waiting for the next crisis or emergency to hit, that this is, something that's going to need to be ongoing.
And Dr. Briscoe-Smith, if you can close us out.
Sure. I mean, I agree with what the good doctors have been saying as well, and just would add that we don't have to be perfect to have the conversation. I often work with parents who are just so worried about doing things right that they don't do anything at all. It's okay for us not to be perfect. We don't have to be perfectly well, perfectly rested, or have the perfect thing to say. It's really important to say something and to try it on and to make the mistake and then to model. I think we want to have our children learn how to learn from their mistakes, to fall down and to get up. So I would really encourage us, as the other folks are kind of saying, let's please lean into these conversations. They are difficult, but they don't have to be perfect. This conversation is not going to break our child. Their inability to manage this outside, their inability to actually speak and advocate on behalf of others, that's the place that I'm more worried. So I'd really encourage us to not focus so much on being perfect, but just going ahead and trying.
Well, thank you. I want to say thank you to Dr. Nathan Chomilo. Thank you, Dr. Jacqueline Douge, and thank you, Dr. Allison Briscoe-Smith. We are so grateful for your time and for sharing your thoughts. And if you would like to share this conversation with other parents and caregivers, you can find it on our Conversations with Common Sense YouTube channel. We will also share links to resources on that page as well. And we hope you'll join us for our next episode of this series next week on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we will have two of our experts from Common Sense, our parenting editors, who will discuss ways to get your kid across the distance learning finish line as we wrap up this school year. And lots of ideas for summer learning, and at a time where kids are more vulnerable to the summer slide than ever. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and take care.